Racist cops racism exposed after Black woman's team steps in. In this eye-opening video, we delve into a shocking incident that highlights the persistent issue of racism within law enforcement. A Black woman's encounter with a racist police officer takes a surprising turn when her team steps in to unveil the officer's prejudice. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
Amara Jackson knew the price of fighting for justice. As a well-known human rights activist and a secret diplomat for the United Nations, she had spent her life navigating the dangerous waters of political and social upheaval. She had seen firsthand how corrupt systems and oppressive regimes targeted the vulnerable, but none of that had ever stopped her. Amara was a Black woman who had fought her way to prominence, and she had done so in a world that often underestimated and disrespected her. This mission, however, would test her in ways she had never expected. Her current task was one of utmost secrecy. She was on her way to meet a critical informant who held information that could expose a massive corruption scheme tied to human trafficking. The criminal network responsible for the trafficking of thousands of innocent people had connections at the highest levels of government across several countries. The operation was delicate, and any mistake could not only cost Amara her life, but also derail the entire international effort to bring down the syndicate. For this mission, Amara's name had been carefully removed from any official records. She traveled under a false identity, driving a rented car registered to another alias. Her team had ensured that even the border authorities wouldn't know who she truly was to guarantee her safety. Everything had been arranged to ensure she would pass unnoticed, but something had gone wrong. As she approached the border checkpoint, a creeping sense of unease settled over her. The line of vehicles moved slowly toward the inspection booths, each car inching forward under the scrutinizing eyes of Border Patrol officers. Amara's hands lightly gripped the steering wheel as she casually scanned her surroundings, taking in the scene without giving away her rising concern. Dressed in simple, nondescript clothes, she knew she looked like any other traveler, but the tension in the air felt different this time. She was cautious, though she had no idea that her name had been flagged in the system. Unbeknownst to her, the dangerous criminal organization she sought to expose had intercepted classified information about her mission. In an attempt to sabotage her operation, hackers working for the group had inserted her name into international databases, linking her identity to several high-profile criminals. Her name now appeared in connection with a list of dangerous fugitives, all wanted for serious crimes including smuggling, terrorism, and organized crime. The Border Patrol agents had no idea they were being manipulated, but they were about to become pawns in a much larger game. Officer John Harper sat in his booth, scanning the database as the next vehicle inched forward. Harper had worked this checkpoint for over a decade. He'd seen every type of traveler pass through: business people, families, suspicious individuals. But today, something caught his attention. The system had flagged a Black woman named Amara Jackson, claiming she was involved in organized crime. According to the alert, she was tied to a dangerous syndicate wanted for human trafficking. Harper's heart raced. This was a big one. Harper wasn't just another border officer. He had his own history with the criminal networks he believed were ruining the country. Over the years, his experiences had hardened him, and he had grown more suspicious of certain people who didn't look like they belonged, people like Amara. Although he never openly expressed his views, Harper harbored deep-seated racial biases. To him, certain groups of people, especially Black individuals, didn't belong in certain places, didn't belong driving nice cars, or passing through borders like this without being questioned. And now here was a Black woman, supposedly involved in international crime. The system had confirmed what his gut had already told him. She was trouble. As Amara's car rolled up to the booth, Harper felt the familiar rush of power that came with moments like these. He flagged her down with a curt motion, signaling for her to roll down the window. She complied, offering a polite smile as she handed over her travel documents. Harper studied her, his gaze lingering on her face longer than necessary. He felt an irrational sense of satisfaction seeing her sitting there, waiting for his approval to pass. "What's your reason for crossing the border today?" Harper asked, his voice flat but probing. "I'm here for business," Amara replied evenly. Her voice was calm, controlled. She knew she had to be careful. The less attention she attracted, the better. The meeting with her informant was only a short drive away, and the last thing she needed was a delay. Harper examined her documents, but the more he looked, the more suspicious he became. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect. He had seen it before. The criminals with the cleanest records often had the most to hide. His gut told him something wasn't right. "Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle?" he asked, but the question carried an underlying threat. Amara hesitated for the briefest second, but she knew she had no choice. Refusing his request could escalate the situation quickly, and as a black woman, she understood the danger of confrontation in moments like this. She had lived her entire life knowing that people like her were seen as threats, even when they had done nothing wrong. So with a measured breath, she stepped out of the car, carefully keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. Harper's hand rested casually on the grip of his holstered gun as he directed her to stand aside. His eyes never left her, watching her every move, searching for any sign of guilt. To him, Amara was already guilty. Her very presence made her suspicious. She didn't look like someone who should be driving a car like that, or crossing this particular border without trouble. His racial bias had already decided her fate long before he had even seen her. "What's your business here?" Harper demanded, his voice now sharper, more assertive. He stepped closer, narrowing the space between them as if to intimidate her. Amara's heart pounded, but her exterior remained calm. She had encountered men like Harper before, men whose minds were already made up about her based solely on her skin color. But this wasn't the time to challenge him. She had to stay focused on her mission. "I'm meeting with a colleague," she replied, her voice steady. "It's a professional engagement." Harper wasn't buying it. He glanced at her car, then back at her. "This car is registered to someone else," he said, his tone accusatory. "It's a rental," Amara answered smoothly. "I'm only using it for this trip." But Harper's suspicion only deepened. He wasn't interested in her explanations. He had already made up his mind that she was hiding something. The alert from the system was enough for him. And now, standing before him was a confident black woman who, in his eyes, didn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. Harper's grip on his gun tightened slightly, though he hadn't drawn it yet. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more damning than the last. "Step over here," Harper ordered, pointing to the side of the checkpoint where a small holding area was set up. "We're going to run a more thorough check on your documents." Amara could feel the situation escalating, but she remained calm. She knew that any sign of resistance or frustration could be used against her. She nodded, following his direction. Inside, however, her mind was racing. Something was terribly wrong. Harper wasn't just asking standard questions, he was fishing for something, convinced that she was a criminal. As she waited in the holding area, Amara's thoughts turned to the mission. Time was slipping away. If she didn't reach her informant soon, the entire operation could collapse. She couldn't let that happen. But with Harper breathing down her neck, and no way to explain her true purpose without blowing her cover. She knew she had to tread carefully. Harper, meanwhile, was running her documents through the system again, determined to find something incriminating. His prejudices clouded his judgment, making him ignore any evidence that didn't fit his narrative. To him, Amara was guilty, she just hadn't slipped up yet. Minutes passed, each one more agonizing than the last. Amara remained outwardly composed, but inside she was calculating her next move. If Harper didn't let her go soon, she would have to find another way out of this situation. And that's when everything changed. The air inside the border checkpoint office was cold and sterile, with fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the room. Amara stood near the back, keeping her posture relaxed, even as the tension in her body grew tighter. Her mind was working overtime, running through every possible scenario and how to defuse the situation without giving away the true nature of her mission. She couldn't afford to let this escalate, but she also knew that her hands were tied. One wrong move could derail everything. Officer John Harper walked in with an air of arrogance, holding her documents in one hand and tapping them against his other palm. His eyes didn't leave her as he approached, his expression a mix of smugness and suspicion. Amara had seen that look countless times before, a man who believed he had already won before the game even began. In his eyes, she was already guilty, and nothing she said would change that. "Ms. Jackson," Harper began, his voice dripping with condescension, "I have some questions about your paperwork." Amara maintained her composure, though she could feel his intentions clearly. He wasn't asking questions because he needed answers. He was looking for a reason to keep her here, to drag this out, to assert his control over the situation. This wasn't about law or procedure. It was about power. "Of course," she replied evenly, her eyes meeting his with calm steadiness. "What seems to be the problem?" Harper flipped through the pages, pausing dramatically as if searching for some hidden inconsistency. "Your paperwork seems too clean," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Everything's in order, but I've learned that when things look too good, it usually means something's being hidden." Amara internally bristled at his implication, but outwardly she gave no sign of irritation. "I assure you, officer, I have nothing to hide. I'm simply traveling for business, as I mentioned earlier." But Harper wasn't listening. His mind was already made up. He leaned forward, dropping the papers onto the table between them with a deliberate thud. "Business, huh?" He smiled coldly. "Mind telling me exactly what kind of business you're in?" Amara kept her face neutral, but she knew this was a dangerous question. Revealing too much about her work could compromise her mission, but giving vague answers would only make him more suspicious. She needed to walk the fine line between transparency and evasion without tipping him off. "I'm involved in international human rights work," she replied calmly. "I'm here to meet with colleagues regarding a project we're working on." Harper's eyes narrowed. "Human rights?" He almost laughed, the mocking tone unmistakable. "And what exactly does that have to do with crossing this border in a rented car under a different name?" The trap was set. Harper thought he had her cornered. To him, this was the moment when she would either slip up or start spinning lies to cover her tracks. He was waiting for her to falter. Amara didn't take the bait. "As I said, I'm traveling for business. My organization prefers discretion for safety reasons. There's nothing illegal about using an alias for protection in sensitive matters." Harper's smirk deepened. "Right, protection. But protection from what, Miss Jackson? Or should I say, from whom?" Yet he was trying to provoke her, to shake her confidence. Amara could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. This wasn't just about her documents anymore, this was about who she was. A black woman standing before a man like Harper, who was looking for any reason to tear her down, to assert his superiority. Her presence alone seemed to challenge his sense of control. "You're hiding something," Harper said, his voice dropping lower. "I can see it. You might think you're clever, but I know people like you. You come in here with your perfect papers, your calm attitude, thinking you can fool us, but I see right through it." Amara's pulse quickened, but she remained still. "People like you." The words hung in the air, thick with implication. She had heard that phrase before, and it always carried the same weight, an accusation rooted not in evidence, but in prejudice. "Officer Harper," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I've complied with every request you've made. I've handed over my documents, answered your questions, and I'm happy to cooperate. But I must insist that you either explain what this is really about or allow me to proceed with my trip. I have important work to do." Harper's eyes darkened. Her refusal to back down only fueled his determination. He wasn't used to people like Amara standing up to him, especially not a black woman who was supposed to be intimidated by his authority. In his mind, she should have been scared, nervous, eager to please him in the hopes of avoiding further trouble. But instead, she was calm, collected, and that infuriated him. He took a step closer to her, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in. You're not going anywhere until I get to the bottom of this. I suggest you stop playing games and start telling the truth." Amara's heart raced. She could feel the situation spiraling out of control, but she couldn't let it show. Harper was pushing her, trying to provoke her into a reaction that he could use against her. She knew she had to stay calm, but the tension in the room was becoming unbearable. "I'm telling you the truth," she replied evenly, though she could feel the strain in her voice. "There's nothing more to say." But Harper wasn't listening. He had already decided that she was guilty of something, anything, and he was going to find it, no matter what. Suddenly, without warning, Harper stepped back and gestured toward the door. Two other officers entered the room, their faces unreadable. Amara's eyes flicked to them, sensing the shift in the dynamic. This wasn't just an interrogation anymore. This was about to turn into something much worse. "Take her to the back," Harper ordered, his voice cold and detached. "We'll see if she's still so confident after a little more thorough questioning." Amara's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. She knew what this meant. They were taking her into a private holding area where they could conduct a more invasive interrogation, one that wouldn't be subject to the usual oversight. This was no longer about her documents or her trip. This was about power, about control, and Harper was making sure she knew exactly who was in charge. The two officers moved toward her, one of them gesturing for her to follow. Amara knew she had no choice. For resistance would only escalate the situation, and she couldn't afford to let this get out of hand. But as she walked toward the door, her mind raced. She needed a plan, and fast. They led her down a narrow hallway, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The walls seemed to close in around her as they guided her into a small, windowless room at the back of the checkpoint facility. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time, Amara felt the full weight of the isolation. Harper entered the room moments later, a triumphant look on his face. He had her exactly where he wanted her, and he was going to make sure she knew it. Two other officers stood by the door, silent and watchful, ready to intervene if necessary. Amara sat down in the metal chair in the center of the room, her hands resting calmly in her lap, though inside she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She couldn't afford to panic. Not now. She had to think, to stay one step ahead of Harper. This was more than just an interrogation, it was a test of her resilience, her ability to outlast him, without giving away anything that could jeopardize her mission. Harper stood in front of her, arms crossed over his chest, his smirk now fully in place. "Let's start again," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Why didn't you tell me what you're really doing here?" Amara met his gaze, refusing to flinch. She knew this game, and she wasn't going to play it on his terms. "I've told you everything I'm allowed to say," she replied firmly. "I'm here on official business, and I'm not at liberty to discuss the details." Harper's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Not at liberty. That's convenient. Makes it easier for you to lie, doesn't it?" Amara held her ground. She wasn't going to let him eat her into a trap. She could see the way he was looking at her, the way his racial biases were driving his every word, his every decision. To him, she was already guilty, simply because of who she was. "I'm not lying," Amara said, her voice firm. "And you know it." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension hanging heavy in the air. Harper's eyes flashed with anger, but Amara didn't waver. She knew this was only the beginning, and she had to be ready for whatever came next. The room was suffocating. Not because of its size, though it was small and windowless, but because of the silence. Amara sat in the cold metal chair, her back straight, her face composed. Every breath she took was calculated, every movement restrained. She had to stay in control, no matter what Harper threw at her. The weight of the situation pressed on her chest, but she had learned long ago how to hide that feeling. She was a black woman who had survived in a world that didn't want her to succeed, and she wasn't about to let a LARPer like John Harper see even a hint of vulnerability. The door creaked open, and Harper stepped back in. His eyes scanned the room as if he were the predator and she the prey. Two officers flanked him, standing by the door, their faces blank and unreadable. Harper didn't speak right away. He seemed to enjoy the silence, savoring the tension, letting it thicken in the air like smoke. Amara remained motionless, her hands resting on the cold table between them, her pulse steady. She knew what Harper was doing. He wanted to break her, to watch her crack under pressure, but she wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Harper dropped a file onto the table with a loud thud. Amara didn't flinch, though the noise startled her for a brief second. He took his time sitting down, leaning back in his chair with an air of arrogance. His smirk, barely noticeable at first, began to curl the corners of his mouth as he stared across the table at her. "I've been running some checks," he said, his voice casual but laced with a sharp edge. "And it seems like there's more to your story than you're letting on. Ms. Jackson." Amara's eyes remained fixed on him, unblinking. She didn't respond. She had learned long ago that silence could be as powerful a weapon as words. Harper clearly expected her to ask what he had found, to defend herself, to fall into his trap, but she wouldn't play his game. That he leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, his fingers steepled in front of him. "You see, something interesting came up when I ran your name through our system again," he continued. "Seems like you've been flagged in connection with a criminal organization. Human trafficking, smuggling, organized crime, you know, the kind of stuff that gets people locked away for a very long time." Amara's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. So, this was their play. The criminal network she was investigating had managed to frame her, planting her name in databases to make her look like a criminal. It was a well-executed move, one that could derail everything if she didn't find a way out. But she couldn't afford to react, not yet. "Care to explain that?" Harper asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Because to me, it looks like you've been hiding a lot more than just your little human rights work." Amara knew she had to choose her words carefully. The more she said, the more ammunition she gave him. but staying silent would only make her look more suspicious. She needed to navigate this situation with precision, like walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, her voice steady. "I've never been involved in any criminal activity." Harper let out a low chuckle. "Oh, come on. Let's not play dumb here. I've seen this before. You're the perfect cover, right? A black woman working for the United Nations, traveling under a false name. Who would suspect someone like you of being involved in something so serious? It's brilliant, really, but I'm not falling for it." Amara's jaw clenched ever so slightly. She was used to these kinds of insinuations, the casual racism that so often came from men like Harper. To him, it was inconceivable that she could hold any real power or influence without using it for something nefarious. But she had learned to let those comments roll off her back. This was bigger than his small-minded views. "You're mistaken," she said, keeping her tone even. "I'm here on official business. Anything you found in your system is a mistake, or worse, it's been planted there by someone who wants to disrupt my work." Harper's smirk widened. "Planted? That's a nice story. I'm sure it works on people who don't know how this system works, but I'm not buying it." He leaned back in his chair again, crossing his arms over his chest as if he had already won. "Here's the thing, Ms. Jackson," he continued, his voice dropping a notch. "You think you can sit there, all calm and collected, and outsmart me. But I've dealt with your kind before." There it was. The phrase that carried so much weight, so much history, your kind. Amara felt the words like a slap, but she didn't flinch. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. He wanted her to react, to break the calm exterior she had so carefully maintained, but she wouldn't let him. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, her voice as steady as ever. Harper leaned forward again, his face now inches from hers. "I mean people like you who think they're too smart, too important to get caught. You come in here, thinking you can fool everyone with your fancy titles and your bullshit humanitarian work, but I'm not buying it." Amara's stomach tightened, but she remained outwardly calm. She knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to provoke her, to make her react so he could justify whatever came next. And she knew that whatever came next wouldn't be good. But she also knew that time was running out. The longer she stayed here, the more likely it was that her mission would fail. She had to find a way to get out of this, and fast. "I'm telling you the truth," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not involved in any criminal activity. If you check with my organization, you'll see that I'm here on legitimate business." Harper's smirk faded slightly, but his eyes still gleamed with satisfaction. "Oh, I will," he said. "But in the meantime, we're going to keep you here until we figure out exactly what you're up to." He stood up, signaling to the two officers by the door. "Take her to the back. We're going to run a more thorough check on everything." Amara's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had expected this. She had known from the moment Harper started his interrogation that he wouldn't let her go easily. But she had hoped to avoid this, to avoid being taken into the deeper, more secluded areas of the facility where things could get dangerous. The two officers moved toward her, their hands resting on their belts, ready to escort her to the back. Amara stood up slowly, her mind racing. She knew she had to comply, but she also knew that this was her last chance to send a signal to her team. Her mission was too important to let it end here. As they led her down the narrow hallway, her mind worked quickly. She glanced down at the watch on her wrist, a seemingly ordinary accessory, but one that held the key to her escape. It was a specially designed device, equipped with encrypted communication software that could send a signal to her team without being detected. She had only seconds to act, but she had trained for this. She knew what to do. The hallway was dimly lit, and the officers flanked her on either side, their eyes scanning for any signs of resistance. Tamara kept her movements subtle, her fingers brushing against the edge of the watch's face as they neared the door at the end of the corridor. With a practiced flick of her wrist, she activated the emergency signal. A small vibration buzzed against her skin, confirming that the message had been sent. They reached the door, and one of the officers opened it, guiding her inside. The room was even smaller than the one before, with bare walls and a single chair in the center. The harsh fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the scene. Tamara was led to the chair and instructed to sit down. She complied, all the while keeping her breathing steady, her mind focused. Harper entered the room a few moments later, his expression cold and calculated. He knew he had her cornered, or at least he thought he did. But Amara knew that her team would be on their way. She just had to hold out long enough for them to get here. Harper circled the room like a predator, his eyes fixed on her, as if trying to read her thoughts. "You know," he began, his voice low, "I don't think you realize how much trouble you're in. This isn't just about a few lies on some paperwork. You've been flagged as a national security threat. And when I'm done here, you'll be wishing you'd never set foot in this country." Tamara remained silent, her mind focused on the ticking clock. Every second that passed brought her closer to rescue, but Harper didn't know that. He thought he had all the time in the world. "You don't have to make this harder on yourself," Harper said, stopping in front of her. "Just tell me what you're really doing here, and maybe I can help you. Maybe we can work something out." Tamara looked up at him, her face expressionless. "I've already told you everything I know." Harper's jaw tightened, and he took a step closer. "You think you're smart, don't you? Do you think you can just sit there and outlast me? But I've got all day, and I'm not leaving until I get what I want." Tamara's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She knew she was running out of time, but she also knew that she had to stay strong. Her team would come for her. They had to. Harper took a step back, crossing his arms over his chest as he looked down at her. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it, we'll do it your way. But don't say I didn't give you a chance." He nodded to the officers by the door, and they stepped forward, ready to begin their more aggressive interrogus. For before they could take another step, the lights in the room flickered and went out. The sudden darkness caught everyone off guard, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then the lights flickered back on, dimmer than before but still functional. Harper looked around, clearly unsettled. "But what the hell was that?" one of the officers muttered, glancing nervously at the ceiling. Harper's expression darkened, and he turned back to Amara. "Stay here," he barked at the officers. "I'm going to check on the system." He stormed out of the room, leaving Amara alone with the two guards. The lights flickered again, this time more violently, and a low hum filled the air. Amara knew what was happening. Her team had received the signal, and they were taking control of the facility's systems. Harper would soon realize that he wasn't the one in control anymore. The flickering lights cast an eerie glow across the cold, bare walls of the interrogation room. The sudden malfunction in the facility's system had thrown Officer Harper off balance, his cool, arrogant composure shaken for the first time. Amara, however, sat calmly in her chair, her fingers still subtly adjusting the settings on her encrypted wristwatch. Every second that passed, she knew her team was moving closer, but there was still time to buy before they could execute the extraction. Harper stormed out of the room after barking orders to his officers, leaving Amara alone with two guards, their eyes constantly darting between her and the malfunctioning lights. The tension was palpable now. These men weren't sure what was happening, but Amara could sense their growing discomfort. They might have been used to controlling the situation, especially when it involved a black woman like her, but now the balance of power was starting to shift, even if they didn't fully understand why yet. One of the guards fidgeted nervously, checking his earpiece. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered under his breath to the other officer, his eyes narrowing on Amara as though she was somehow responsible for the technical glitch. The other guard, trying to maintain his composure, shrugged. "I don't know, but we've got orders to stay put." Amara didn't respond. She let them stew in their confusion. Harper's arrogance had blinded him to the fact that she wasn't a defenseless suspect, but a highly trained diplomat on a mission. These officers, like Harper, had underestimated her from the moment she arrived, seeing her not as a professional but as a potential threat, based solely on her skin color. Now that underestimation was working in her favor. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and Amara could feel the buzz of energy in the air as the facility's systems struggled to maintain control. Her team was already inside the network, likely disabling security measures and preparing to take down the entire system if necessary. She just had to hold on a little longer. In the hallway, Harper paced furiously. His frustration grew every passing minute as his attempts to regain control of the situation failed. He had gone from feeling invincible in his control over the suspect to feeling vulnerable and exposed, and that vulnerability was something he despised. He slammed his hand down on the control panel near the wall, but the system refused to respond. Cameras blinked on and off, the communication lines crackled with static, and every command he entered was met with resistance from a system he had once thought he dominated. "How the hell is this happening?" Harper growled to one of the junior officers trying to fix the electrical panel. The officer shook his head, fumbling with the wires. "I don't know, sir," the officer replied, his voice trembling slightly. "It seems like the whole system's under some kind of external interference. We might have been hacked." Hacked. The word struck Harper like a blow. His eyes narrowed, and his thoughts immediately went to the woman sitting in the room down the hall. Amara Jackson. Could she be behind this? How could she possibly have the resources to disrupt a secure government facility? But then again, she was no ordinary suspect, and Harper knew it. That watch on her wrist, the calm demeanor in the face of interrogation, it all pointed to someone far more dangerous and well-connected than he had originally thought. He turned sharply, heading back toward the interrogation room, with a newfound sense of urgency. If she was involved in this, he needed to stop her before things spiraled further out of control. Back in the room, the tension between the two guards was growing. One of them glanced at Amara, suspicion clear in his eyes. "You know something about this, don't you?" he demanded, his voice edging on aggressive. Amara looked up, her face still composed, but her eyes sharp. "I've told you everything I'm allowed to say," she replied evenly. She wasn't about to give them any information they could use, and besides, the clock was ticking. Her team was coming. And just as the guard was about to step toward her, the door flew open, and Harper strode back into the room, his face twisted with anger and suspicion. He was losing control, and he hated it. "All right," Harper barked, his voice echoing off the walls. "Enough of this." He pointed directly at Amara. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's over. Whatever's going on with our systems, you're behind it, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it right now." Amara said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than words in moments like this. Harper's anger was his weakness, and she wasn't about to give him any reason to tighten his grip on her. Harper motioned to the guards. "Cuff her," he ordered, his voice cold. "I don't want her moving an inch." The guards hesitated for a split second, unsure of whether they should escalate the situation, but Harper's authority was absolute. They stepped forward, one of them roughly pulling Amara's wrists behind her and snapping the cuffs on tightly. Amara winced slightly at the pressure, but she kept her expression blank. Harper leaned down to her level, his voice low and menacing. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think you can come in here, act all innocent, and then hack into our systems while we're not looking?" His eyes burned with fury. "Well, let me tell you something. This is my facility and you're not leaving here until I get what I want." Amara met his gaze unflinching. "I've done nothing wrong," she said calmly. "Whatever's happening here has nothing to do with me." Harper slammed his fist down on the table in front of her, rattling the metal frame. "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "I know you're involved. You've been flagged as a security threat, and now our entire system is compromised. You think that's just a coincidence?" Amara didn't answer. She knew that arguing with him would only make things worse. She needed to wait, to bide her time and let the team do their work. But Harper wasn't finished. He stood up straight, his eyes cold and calculating. "You know what?" he said slowly. "I've had enough of this. I'm done playing nice." He turned to the guards. "Bring her to the holding cell," he ordered, "and make sure she's locked down tight. I don't want any more surprises." The guards nodded and moved to grab Amara by the arms, hauling her to her feet. Her heart raced, but she kept her breathing steady. This wasn't how she had planned things, but she had to trust that her team would reach her in time. As they led her down another narrow corridor, the buzzing lights overhead flickered once again. The hum of the malfunctioning system grew louder, and the entire facility seemed to groan under the strain of whatever was happening behind the scenes. As they approached the heavy steel door leading to the holding cells, Amara glanced at her wristwatch, the small light on its face still pulsing softly. Her team had to be close now. She could feel it. Just as the guard reached for the door, the entire facility plunged into darkness. The lights went out completely, leaving them standing in pitch blackness. The hum of the electrical system sputtered and died, and for a few seconds, the silence was absolute. Then, the emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim red glow over the hallway. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, their hands tightening on Amara's arms. The air was thick with tension, and even Harper, who had followed them into the hallway, seemed momentarily unsure of what was happening. Amara took a slow, deep breath. She knew what this meant. Her team had successfully infiltrated the facility's power grid, and now they were in control. She just had to stay calm and wait for the final phase of the extraction. Harper, however, wasn't about to let go of his control so easily. "What the hell is going on now?" he barked, glaring at the guards. "Get her in the cell now." But before the guards could move, a voice crackled over Harper's radio. "Sir, we've got a situation up here," the voice said, strained and panicked. "We've lost control of the entire grid. Cameras are down, communications are down, we're blind." Harper's face went pale, and for a moment he was silent. Then he yanked the radio from his belt and shouted into it. "What do you mean, blind? Get the backup systems online now." "We're trying, sir," the voice responded, "but it's not best." Harper's hand clenched around the radio, his knuckles white with frustration. He turned back to Amara, his eyes blazing with fury. "You did this," he snarled. "You think you're going to walk out of here, don't you? Well, I've got news for you. You're not leaving." Amara didn't respond. She kept her gaze steady, waiting. Just then, the sound of boots echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each step. Harper and the guards turned toward the noise, their hands moving instinctively to their weapons. The tension in the air was palpable. Out of the shadows emerged a group of figures dressed in tactical gear, their faces obscured by helmets and night vision goggles. They moved with precision and authority, their weapons held at the ready. Amara recognized them immediately. It was her team. Harper's eyes widened in disbelief. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with anger. One of the figures stepped forward, lowering their weapons slightly. "We're with the United Nations," the figure said, their voice calm but firm. "Evs Jackson is coming with us." Harper's face twisted in rage. "The hell she is," he shouted, reaching for his gun. But before he could draw his weapon, one of the tactical team members raised a hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," they said quietly. "This situation is already out of your control. Stand down, officer." Harper froze, his hand still hovering over his gun. His eyes darted between Amara and the team, and for the first time, Amara saw a flicker of doubt in his expression. He was beginning to realize that he was no longer in charge. The guard beside Amara stepped back, his grip on her arm loosening. He was clearly unsure of what to do. The other guard hesitated as well, looking to Harper for direction. Harper's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. He knew he was outnumbered, and there was no way he could take on an entire tactical team. Slowly he lowered his hand, stepping back with a look of pure hatred etched on his face. "Fine," he spat, his voice venomous. "Take her, but this isn't over." Amara's team stepped forward, releasing her from the guard's grip and guiding her toward the exit. As they moved quickly down the hallway, the emergency lights still flickering overhead, Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had made it through the worst of it. But as they neared the exit, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Harper wasn't the type to give up easily, and she knew he would come after her one way or another. Outside, the cool night air hit her face as they emerged from the facility. The tactical team escorted her to a waiting vehicle where she climbed inside, her heart still racing from the ordeal. As they pulled away from the border facility, Amara looked out the window, watching as the building disappeared into the darkness. She had survived this encounter, but the fight was far from finished. Harper would come for her, and the next time she had to be ready. The tactical vehicle hurtled down the dark highway, the rumble of the engine barely audible over the thick tension that filled the air. Amara sat in the back seat, her mind racing as the vehicle moved further away from the border facility. They had managed to extract her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. She knew without a doubt that Officer Harper wouldn't let this go easily. Men like him didn't just walk away from defeat, they retaliated, and they did so with vengeance. The tactical team surrounding her sat in silence, their focus razor-sharp. The driver gripped the wheel tightly, eyes constantly scanning the road for any signs of pursuit. The team leader, sitting in the passenger seat, kept one hand on the radio, waiting for updates from their secure communications network. Amara could feel the weight of their unease. Though they accomplished the extraction, the job wasn't over, and they all knew Harper wouldn't stop at what had just happened. The night outside was pitch black, the only light coming from the headlights cutting through the empty highway. The vastness of the landscape around them felt oppressive, as if the darkness itself was closing in. Amara's body was tense, every muscle coiled with the anticipation of what was to come. Her mind kept replaying the encounter with Harper, the look of pure hatred on his face when she had remained calm in the face of his threats. His obsession with power had been palpable, and she had no doubt that his pursuit would be relentless. The driver's voice broke the silence. "We've got about 30 minutes until we reach the rendezvous point. No sign of anyone on our tail." Amara nodded silently, but her instincts told her that their escape hadn't gone unnoticed. Harper was too proud, too consumed by his own ego to let this go, and if he couldn't track them down through official channels, he would find another way. She had seen it before: corrupt officers who used their connections to carry out personal vendettas, stretching their reach far beyond their jurisdiction. Harper was exactly the type of man who would go that far, especially after the public humiliation of losing control. The team leader turned to her, his voice calm but serious. "We're taking a detour. The situation at the border is unstable, and there's been chatter that local law enforcement might be compromised. We can't take any risks." Amara felt a chill run down her spine. The idea that Harper had connections beyond the facility wasn't surprising, but the speed with which he might be able to mobilize them was alarming. If he had already tapped into his network, the safe house they were heading for could be compromised too. The clock was ticking faster than any of them had anticipated. "Understood," Amara replied, her voice steady. She was used to adjusting plans on the fly, but something about this situation felt different. The stakes were higher, the danger more immediate. She couldn't afford to let Harper's interference derail the mission. The information she was supposed to receive from the informant was too crucial. It was the key to exposing an international human trafficking ring that had ties to multiple government agencies, and her delay at the border had already set them back too much. The tactical vehicle veered off the highway onto a smaller road, the lights from the highway disappearing behind them as they entered a more secluded area. The road ahead was narrow and surrounded by thick forests on either side, casting long shadows over the path as the headlights illuminated the trees. The sense of isolation deepened, and Amara's hand instinctively brushed against the communication device on her wrist, a small but powerful tool she had used to alert her team back at the border. She checked the time. They were close to the meeting point, but something still gnawed at her. The thought of Harper's reach troubled her more than she wanted to admit. His racism had been evident from the moment she stepped out of her vehicle, but it was his arrogance and belief in his own power that made him truly dangerous. He didn't just want to control her, he wanted to break her, to remind her that, in his eyes, she didn't belong in the position of influence she held. Amara's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp crackle of the team leader's radio. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "Change of plans. We have intel that suggests a roadblock ahead. Possible hostile actors. Proceed with extreme caution." The driver cursed under his breath, immediately slowing the vehicle. The rest of the team went on high alert, their hands instinctively moving toward their weapons. Amara felt her heart rate quicken, though she kept her expression neutral. A roadblock meant they were expected. Harper's reach was faster than they had anticipated, and he had likely activated his network to trap them before they could reach their destination. The SUV slowed to a crawl as the road ahead became visible. Sure enough, in the distance, the flashing lights of a roadblock came into view, and even from far away, Amara could see the silhouettes of armed men standing by the vehicles waiting. This wasn't a standard checkpoint, it was an ambush. "They've found us," the team leader said grimly, his voice a low growl. "Reverse. Get us out of here." The driver immediately shifted into reverse, but as they began to back up, the glare of headlights appeared behind them, blocking their escape route. The tactical vehicle was boxed in. Amara's pulse quickened as she scanned the situation. They were surrounded. The leader's voice cut through the tension. "We're in a tight spot. Arm yourselves. This could get ugly. The team moved with swift precision, pulling their weapons from their holsters, eyes trained on the situation outside. Amara remained still for a moment, assessing their options. They were well trained, but this was a trap, and Harper had them exactly where he wanted them. Out of the vehicle. Now, a voice boomed from the front of the roadblock, amplified by a megaphone. The authority in the voice was undeniable, but it wasn't a voice she recognized. Whoever was running this operation wasn't part of the regular law enforcement team. It had to be someone working directly for Harper, someone outside the law, just like him. Amara's tactical team exchanged glances. They knew fighting wasn't the answer. They were outgunned and outnumbered. The leader turned to her. "We have to comply for now, but be ready for anything." Amara nodded, her mind racing. This was exactly the kind of situation she had feared. Harper had mobilized forces faster than they had anticipated, and now they were at the mercy of men who didn't follow the rules. The tactical team slowly opened the doors and stepped out, their hands raised in a show of compliance, though their weapons were still within reach. Amara followed, her body tense but her face calm. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the glare of the roadblock's headlights nearly blinded her. Armed men stood in front of the blockade, their weapons trained on the team. They wore no identifying marks, no badges. These weren't official law enforcement officers. These were mercenaries, hired guns. Harper's network, fully activated. The man with the megaphone stepped forward, his face shadowed by the brim of a hat, but his posture oozed authority. "You're under our control now," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "Move away from the vehicle slowly." Amara and her team did as they were told, backing away from the SUV and standing in the middle of the road, the forest closing in around them like a cage. She could feel the weight of the weapons trained on them. Every movement monitored. There was no easy way out of this. The man with the megaphone took a few more steps forward, his gaze landing on Amara. "As Jackson," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "Officer Harper sends his regards." Amara's blood ran cold. Harper had indeed pulled all the strings, and now she was face to face with the result of his vendetta. This wasn't about justice or the law anymore. This was personal. Harper wanted her out of the way, and he had found the means to make it happen. The man gestured with his hand, and two of the mercenaries stepped forward, their eyes locked on Amara. "You're coming with us," he said simply. "The rest of your team can stay. For now." Amara's tactical team tensed, ready to act, but she raised her hand slightly, signaling them to stand down. They were outmatched here, and any sudden moves could turn this into a bloodbath. She needed to buy time, to think of a way out of this. "You're making a mistake," Amara said, her voice calm, but firm. "Harper's vendetta isn't worth what you're doing here. You know that." The man smiled coldly. "This isn't about Harper anymore. You've made enemies far beyond him. You're not just a diplomat, you're a threat. And threats need to be neutralized." Amara's pulse quickened. She had expected Harper to come after her, but now it was clear that the network of corruption she was investigating had extended its reach. The people who had hired these mercenaries weren't just doing Harper's bidding. They were protecting something much bigger, something that Amara had come too close to uncovering. The man signaled again, and the mercenaries moved toward her. Amara's body tensed, her mind racing for options. She could feel the tension from her tactical team behind her. They wanted to intervene, but they knew it would only lead to violence. As the mercenaries closed in, Amara took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. This was at the moment where everything would either fall apart or shift in her favor. She had to act, and she had to do it now. In one fluid motion, she reached for the small device concealed in her sleeve, the one she had been holding onto since the moment they left the border facility. It was a last resort tool, something she hoped she wouldn't have to use, but now there was no choice. She activated it with a quick press of her fingers. Instantly, a sharp, high-pitched frequency filled the air, causing the mercenaries to stop in their tracks, clutching their heads in pain. The sound was disorienting, a non-lethal but effective way to disrupt their concentration. It gave Amara and her team the precious seconds they needed. Now, Amara shouted, and her tactical team sprang into action. They moved with precision, using the confusion caused by the frequency to disarm the nearest mercenaries. Amara ducked low, avoiding the sweep of a rifle butt as one of the mercenaries tried to recover. The frequency continued to pulse, giving her team the upper hand, if only for a moment. But moments were all they needed. As the mercenaries scrambled to regain control, Amara's team took out their weapons, moving with lethal efficiency. The situation, once dire, now shifted in their favor. Harper's ambush had been well planned, but he hadn't accounted for Amara's preparation. The chaos of the fight unfolded quickly, and within minutes, the mercenaries were disarmed, restrained, and on the ground. The man with the megaphone, now stripped of his authority, lay unconscious, his own weapon lying uselessly at his side. Amara stood over him, breathing heavily. She had survived, but only just. Harper's reach had been broader than she anticipated, but now she had seen the extent of his desperation and the network of power that he was connected to. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The moon hung high in the night sky, casting a cold, silver glow over the forest clearing where Amara and her team stood victorious after the ambush. The defeated mercenaries lay bound on the ground, groaning in pain, their weapons scattered and useless. Amara's chest heaved with each breath as the adrenaline began to ebb, but her mind stayed sharp, calculating the next move. They had won this battle, but Harper was still out there watching, waiting, and plotting his next attack. The tactical team leader stepped up to her, his face hardened with determination. "We need to move. Now, Harper's not going to stop, and we've already lost too much time. The informant is still waiting." Amara nodded, her gaze drifting to the unconscious mercenary leader at her feet. He had underestimated her. So had Harper, but she couldn't dwell on that now. The mission wasn't complete until she had secured the information that would expose the trafficking ring. This fight wasn't just personal, it was a battle against a much larger machine of corruption, and she was right at the heart of it. "Let's go," Amara said, her voice resolute. "We need to reach the rendezvous point." As they moved swiftly back to the vehicle, Amara's mind raced. Harper had overplayed his hand, using mercenaries to try and stop her, but it had only revealed the scope of the network she was up against. Whoever had backed Harper was willing to go to extreme lengths to stop her, which meant the information she was after was more dangerous than she'd anticipated. The clock was ticking, and every second lost brought her closer to the edge of a larger, more insidious conspiracy. The Sov roared to life, speeding down the narrow forest road once again. Amara sat in the back seat, staring out the window as the trees whipped by in a blur. She knew that Harper wouldn't give